I'm a scientist by nature, and
Right.
so evidence is very persuasive to me, right? And the lack of evidence is also persuasive, and that's what I see. I see a lot of evidence, historical evidence for the authenticity of the Gospels, and a complete lack of evidence for the fact that they were somehow written much later.
Welcome to the Significant Women Podcast with Carol McLeod. Boy, today's episode, let me tell you, it might just knock your socks off. I can tell you right now, put your thinking caps on. Remember when your elementary school teacher used to say that to you? Put your thinking caps on, because today I am joined by Dr. Ward Sanford. Now, I know you're always a little bit surprised when I have a man on the podcast, but don't worry. This conversation with Dr. Sanford fits beautifully into our hearts for understanding faith and biblical history and the women who lived courageously during difficult times. Dr. Sanford is a retired hydrologist. What do hydrologists even do, right? But most importantly, he is a man of deep faith and has written a powerful 4-book historical novel series titled Cry for Jerusalem, centered on the early church and the destruction of Jerusalem in the first century. Now, you might think I'm not interested in all that. Oh, but you are. Today, we're diving into the history behind these novels, the writings of a historian by the name of Josephus, one of my favorite historians, actually, and why understanding the early church matters so much for believers in the 21st century. We will especially explore the role of women in this very dangerous season of history and the historical evidence for Jesus and the New Testament. We're going to learn from the faith of these early believers who lived through incredibly turbulent times. Listen, what we're going through as a church today is not new. Every believer in every millennia, in every century, has lived through difficult times for the cause of Jesus Christ. I know that Dr. Sanford's wisdom is going to mean a lot to you today, so lean in and listen. I'm here with Dr. Ward Sanford today. You know, you're going to be surprised because I'm talking to a man and most of my guests are women. But Dr. Sanford, I have had some men on from time to time. So welcome to the Significant Women Podcast.
Thank you, Carol, for having me.
Oh, I'm thrilled to have you. And I know our conversation is going to be very energetic today. You've accomplished so many great things in your life, and maybe we'll touch on that later, what your career has been. But I want to jump right into what you're doing today. You've told me that you've recently retired as a hydrologist, but now you're writing books about the early church. So let's just go for it, Dr. Sanford. Let's go for the jugular here. Why are you writing these historical novels about the early faith of Christians?
Thank you, Carol. We've now completed a series of 4 novels called Cry for Jerusalem. They're set in the first century AD. And there's a couple reasons I wanted to author this series. The first is I got fascinated with this character of Josephus, known as Flavius Josephus. My visits to Jerusalem, he gets quoted so often in people trying to understand Jerusalem in the first century. So when I started to try to read him myself, I realized this guy, this historian. He's a historian, Jewish historian, who then moved to Rome, where he wrote these histories. Was an eyewitness to everything that happened in the first century. He lived there. He was an eyewitness. Not only was he an eyewitness, but he was intimately involved in everything that happened in the fall in Jerusalem and the destruction of the temple. And I was so amazed, not only at that, but at the the details and the drama involved, incredible things like you hear about, you can't make this stuff up. Well, that's what that's the kind of stuff he talks about. And so I'm like, well, how come I've never heard these stories? And a lot of people, they know that the year 70 AD is when the Romans destroyed Jerusalem, and that was my limit of knowledge. And so I realized, if somebody put these into novel form, then I bet people would read it, because trying to pick up Josephus and reading it is like reading a history book that was written 300 years ago. It's really difficult. So that was the first emphasis on doing it. But the approach I took was not to make this a Christian series, but to try to make it open to a more general audience and reinforce the idea that Jesus was part of history. And everything we know about the first century supports that. And by putting the story in there and having the main characters sort of run into to Christians as they're going about their dramatic lives, um, supports that. So that's really the reasoning behind this series.
So, as you said, Dr. Sanford, so Josephus lived during the first century, and he observed what was happening during the days of the early church. So, would you say that he observed some of the events in the book of Acts, or was he a little bit later than that?
He was born, let's see, I think about 33. So he was probably a little young for some of the books, but he certainly was involved, and Peter and Paul were not executed until the 60s, and he was certainly aware of everything going on and of this Christian sect that was developing. He actually writes some very famous things about Christians and who Jesus was at the time. Not only Jesus, but he mentions some circumstantial things like John the Baptist and Jesus' brother James being executed, and other things where it's like people argue that somebody could make up something direct, but when you have circumstantial mentionings like this, it's really supportive of the historical accuracy of what we read in the New Testament.
So, this historian by the name of Josephus, you relied on his works heavily to craft some novels about the first century church.
That's right. It's very heavily taken from everything he wrote, all of the plot lines that he describes, because he was there, he was involved.
Right.
He was an upper class Jew, right, who initially got sent to Rome, so he was very familiar with the Romans, the Roman military tactics. And for this reason, when he returned to Judea and the rebellion started, he got put in charge of defending Galilee, where he was then captured by the Romans. But curiously, they didn't put him to death. They saw him potentially as a valuable resource, seeing he was educated and fluent in Latin and Greek. And so he sort of saw himself as sort of a self-appointed liaison to the Romans. He was trying to get the rebels to surrender, because he knew with the force that Rome had sent against Jerusalem that they would not be able to withstand this, and he wanted the city and the temple to survive, right? But unfortunately, he failed, and then what it appears like is that he's over with the Romans, potentially helping them. So he got labeled a traitor, basically. So the Jews for centuries saw him as a traitor. But the irony is, while he was then in Rome, he wrote down incredible amounts of history, Jewish history, not only mirroring the Old Testament, but everything between the Testaments that we know is because Josephus, the historian, wrote it all down. So he's a very important historical person.
So you would say that his voice is a very reliable historical voice, that if Josephus said it in his writings, we can strongly consider it to be truth.
That's pretty much the case for all scholars, although some will say, well, he might have been biased toward the Romans, or some would say he might be biased towards the Jews. But basically, he is the best, a most reliable author from the time in terms of history. His goal was to write down accurate history.
Wow, love it. Okay, but I want to talk about this with you today, Dr. Sanford. Your characters in your books, in your series, uh, Cry for Jerusalem, you've got women in those books. So let's talk about the role of women in the early church.
Right. So I would say there's five main characters. Josephus himself, goes by the name Joseph in the series, as one of them, but other people he gets involved as. Um, the antagonist in the series is this new governor that comes to Judea, and he's a real person that's described. All this is described in Josephus's writings. His name is Gessius Florus, and his goal is basically to go and enrich himself and raid the Jewish temple to try to steal gold and not only for Rome, but keep a lot for himself. So he's the antagonist. He starts the rebellion. Josephus describes this. And, but the five main characters, in addition to, Josephus, there's a Roman he mentions in his writings as a friend. So we develop him into a full character, this Roman centurion named Nicanor. And then we decide we want to have, when I say we, it's because I hired a professional writer to help me this, right? Because I'm not skilled or experienced in writing in novel form, and I wanted this to be a good series. So we decided it would be good to have some strong female characters, and so we put two of them in. One of them is recorded in history as so when this starts, Nero is the emperor. Nero's wife's name is Poppaea, and one of her best friends' name is Cleo, short for Cleopatra. And Josephus encounters this noble woman on his way to Rome, and this group of people become friends. So she's one of them. Well, it turns out she has an arranged marriage to Gessius Florus, who's the bad guy, right? So although she's married to him, she's friends with Nero's wife, and they are both Jewish sympathizers. So they come to Judea, and she discovers that her husband has very evil intentions and is basically this cruel guy, and she has to decide how to escape and sort of passively resist the evil that's going on in from her own husband, right? So this is kind of her theme, her storyline. We also decide to give Josephus a younger sister. Her name is Miriam, right? Now, Josephus never mentions he has a sister, but he doesn't say he doesn't. So sort of one of our ways of doing the story is we include every historical event we can, but if nothing's mentioned about it and it seems plausible, we can add, have some creative license to add a character or two. So we have this younger sister of Josephus, Miriam, and she gets attacked by Romans in the tunnels under Jerusalem, but is saved at the last minute by this older member of this group called the Sicarii. The Sicarii are Jewish, essentially Jewish assassins or soldiers who are resisting Rome, right? So this guy ends up training Miriam as a member of the Sicarii. So she's living at home as a single young woman, but on the side, unbeknownst to her parents, she's off um, in this role of a Sicarii. And so the two women in our series, they're fighting against the evil they have in their lives, struggling the best way they can, right?
So do we know this to be historically accurate that women shaped the early church in dangerous times? Would you say that was true? Like what truly from the readings of Josephus, from what you know of early church history, Dr. Sanford, what was the role of women in the early church?
So Josephus doesn't write anything particular about the church. He's not involved with them in particular. We just wanted to tell a story where a dramatic page turner novel series where women are strongly involved, trying to resist what's going on with the Romans oppressing the Jews.
So, Dr. Sanford, as you read the writings of Josephus, what was one thing that he wrote about that just really shocked you or surprised you? And you thought to yourself, wow, what an interesting bit of history that I really never knew before. Was there anything
Yeah, so,
like that?
yeah, there were some things that surprised me. One thing, I start reading it, and the rebellion actually started in 66, not 70. And the Romans, that's when the rebels had enough of Cassius Florus, and they started a rebellion. They kicked the Romans out of Jerusalem, and the Romans sent in a legion to put down the rebellion. I thought, okay, well, this is where it happens, but the Jews win, right? I didn't realize that at first the Jews actually won and kicked the Romans out, and they were an independent state for 4 years. So that was the first surprise. The second surprise, then, um, like I said, Josephus was put in charge of defending Galilee. So when one legion was not enough to conquer Jerusalem, and in fact that legion was defeated, Nero in Rome said we can't possibly tolerate that. So they pick a very experienced general and send in 4 legions, right? And he says he's going to do this the right way. He's going to go slowly and attacks Galilee. And Josephus is there to help defend it militarily. They get in this small fortress town that's put under siege. And when he's captured, it's pretty dramatic. He and his soldiers are some of them managed to hide in a cave under the city. So when the Romans come in, they can't find them. But when they do find them, the soldiers decide to have this suicide pact. They're not going to get captured by the Romans. Now, I'd heard this in the story of Masada later when the Jews are captured, but I didn't realize this also. The same thing happened there in Galilee, and Josephus manages to survive the suicide pact. And when he's taken before the Roman general, who is Vespasian, is this Roman general, and he had this vision of a Roman leader who was gonna rule the world, and he quotes a verse that we consider to be a messianic prediction that one will come out of Israel to rule the entire world.
Mhm.
And this is the verse he uses, but instead of having it as a messianic prediction, he goes before Vespasian and he says, "You're the man in my dream. You're
Wow.
going to be the ruler of the world." But Vespasian says, "I'm just a general, and there's a bunch of politicians and others in Rome that would take over if Nero was out, and so you're kind of crazy." But it was kind of curious. They kept Josephus around, and lo and behold, within a year or two, Vespasian ends up becoming emperor. So Josephus actually made this correct prediction, and now they actually have quite a bit of respect for him. So they release him from his chains, and like I said, he hangs around trying to be a liaison to convince the Jews to surrender. So I mean, those are some pretty dramatic, important parts of the story that most people don't realize that are very interesting. So.
It is interesting. And as I hear you talk, Dr. Sanford, as I hear you discuss and unpack what life was like at that moment in history in the first century, I can't help but compare it to other times in history. You know, Dr. Sanford, when people get upset about what Christians are going through today and the times that we live in, I always think to myself, yeah, this is not the only time it's been hard.
Yeah.
Throughout all of history, I mean, Peter told the early church to sing in trials. I'm wondering if my conversation with Dr. Sanford has stirred up questions in your heart about faith, about the viability of Scripture, about the truth of the gospel, or about, well, I want to stand firm in my faith the way those early believers did. If my conversation with Dr. Sanford has stirred up some of those questions or others like them, I have a resource that we've designed especially for you. I have written a video Bible study titled Unshakable, and it's available online for you to watch at your own pace. In this Bible study, Unshakable, we dig into the tenets of our faith. Did Jesus actually exist? Was he really dead? How do we know that the resurrection story is one of truth? We talk about how we can trust Scripture. How do we know that the books in the Bible are inspired by God and are the writings that God chose to be in the Holy Scripture? How do we live with confidence when our culture and our faith collide? You can access this Bible study, Unshakable, anytime, anywhere, from any place, and allow God to strengthen your faith from the inside out. We've included the link in the show notes so you can learn more. Click on that link and get started today. Now, let's jump back into this important conversation about the early church with Dr. Sanford. So, what did you learn personally as a man of faith about how to live with your faith at the forefront during a rugged moment in history from writing the story?
Well, one of the things that I also included in this story was the whole fact that Jesus predicted that this was going to happen in his Olivet discourse that you can read in Matthew and Luke. He says, this temple is going to be destroyed, and this generation will not pass away
Right,
before these things happen.
right,
And so we managed to weave that prediction, that prophecy, into the story itself. And so he warns that we're going to have trials and tribulations, and don't be surprised when these things happen.
right,
Right.
right. Yeah, I mean, that's why I love studying the early church, Dr. Sanford, is because we cannot alienate ourselves and think we're the only generation
Right.
that's ever experienced something difficult.
In
That's
fact,
crazy.
the last few years, I keep thinking history is just repeating itself. We thought people start to think, well, we've gotten this is all behind us now. World War II and all the military kind of world conflicts. Haven't we gotten past this? And uh, you know, tyrants and dictators. All of that has not gone away.
Right, right. There's still good versus evil going on in
Yeah, there's
the
going
world.
on, right?
Yes,
It's
yes,
the enemy, our enemy has not just given up and taken a back seat. Although we seemed like there's been a pause for years. He's been plotting and scheming, and things can turn sour.
right. And I always think about what Paul said about how we don't war against flesh and blood, but
That's
against
right.
powers and principalities. And so the enemy is still on the prowl, seeking somebody that he can devour. So this leads me to another question. So I'm thinking about my listeners, Dr. Sanford. I'm thinking about moms and grandmothers and college students who listen to my podcast. Why should they care about what happened to the early church in Roman history and in Jerusalem? Why is it important for them to have a clear understanding of what happened back then?
I think it's important. And nowadays, we hear so many things on Facebook or YouTube or whatever you're listening to. These people come in trying to tell you, well, Jesus never existed, and the apostles didn't write the gospels, and these sort of things. And it's important to remind ourselves that there's really, really good um, history and documentation that really supports the New Testament, things that happened, and it really was part of history, and you can't just sweep it under the rug, right? So to reinforce all of that really helps fight back against the enemy's things he's doing today, which is trying to put doubt in everybody's mind that these things really happened.
Yeah, Dr. Sanford, I'm currently writing a Bible study titled Unshakable, and it's about the tenets of our faith. And of course, one of the topics I cover is, did Jesus really exist or not? How do we know that? And one of the things that I read, Dr. Sanford, is that there's more historical evidence that Jesus existed than there is that Shakespeare existed. Now, I know that's one person's perspective, yet still it's a perspective that we have the historical evidence that Jesus actually existed. Would you comment on that for a minute from the perspective of Josephus and perhaps other things you've read and studied? Jesus actually existed.
Right. We have not only the biblical record, which is internally consistent, but others outside the Bible, like Josephus, saying there's this group of Christians around, and they're following this guy that was crucified, and they claim he was raised from the dead. And Romans, Roman writers like Tacitus mentions him as well, and 95% of scholars will agree with that. It's only the fringe people that sometimes tend to make a lot of noise, and the fringe people get attention because there's a lot of people out there that's what they want to hear. They want to hear that, though, all the Bible's probably not true and this guy never existed. That way they can dismiss the whole thing. So the fringe group has an audience that they appeal to, but 95% of scholars, even the critical ones, are admit the fact there's just too much historical evidence that Jesus actually existed to try to dismiss that fact.
What do
And
they, what do they do with the historical evidence that he was crucified, buried, and rose again? What do those same scholars
well,
do?
they'll so one of the points you should realize is that the reason they want to dismiss the Gospels as being written a century or more later is they'll take that very prophecy of the destruction of Jerusalem and say, well, nobody could have predicted that. That's supernatural. When in reality, that's just kind of almost seeing the handwriting on the wall, right? So they say, well, the Gospel of Mark was written first, and there's this prediction of the destruction of Jerusalem. So that must have been written after the destruction, and people are sort of back prophesying. So from there on, they sort of come up with this artificial a timeline of gospels being written by other people, like decades later, and so since it's so late, it couldn't have been the original authors. But it's all speculation. There's no when you start looking for actual evidence for what they're saying, there isn't any. The only evidence there is the earliest church fathers actually quoting from the gospels hundreds of times within a decade or a few decades of the gospels actually being written. So I'm a scientist by nature, and
Right.
so evidence is very persuasive to me, right? And the lack of evidence is also persuasive, and that's what I see. I see a lot of evidence, historical evidence for the authenticity of the gospels, and a complete lack of evidence for the fact that they were somehow written much later.
Well, that's what I love about your series, Cry for Jerusalem, is that you are a scientist, Dr. Sanford. And so your attention to detail is immaculate, because you're somebody, prove it to me. I got to see the
Yes.
facts. And so that
Yeah,
makes
I'm very,
it
I'm, I'm
very
very, I'm very much attentive to the fact that I don't want anything in the story that's wrong,
right.
or that is different from what we know has been written about the time. So yeah, that's something about my personality, just being being and my training over years and years is being attention to little details, right? So,
Right, right. So, who did you write this series for? Who is your expected reader for the Cry for Jerusalem series?
well, like I said, I think at the beginning, I wanted this to be appeal to a broad audience. So Christians love the series, but also non-believers who are not antagonistic to Christianity and just interested in the history. We'll pick this up and find this a very dramatic, page-turning story, and we'll learn a lot about history. So you might have Jewish friends that would pick this up. This is I consider this to be a Jewish-friendly series. It's a very important time in history for them, and they will be very interested in this kind of a novel series.
So are there 4 books? Is that right? And the
There
initial,
are 4 books, yes.
and so what's next? Are you going to continue the series? Will you start a new series? Are your writing days over? What's
I
next?
think my novel writing days are over, although in all of that work looking up Josephus, I got very involved in trying to understand what the Temple Mount looked like at the time, right? And there's different theories about that. And being so tied into the writings of Josephus, I tend to think the most popular ideas now by archaeologists um, are probably not the model they put up is not what Josephus was describing. I mean, I'm not the first person to say this, but I discovered back in the 1800s, when the British first went in to start doing exploration around the Temple Mount, and they sent in a guy named Charles Warren. If you know anything about Jerusalem and its history, that name might ring a bell. But he actually did diggings around the Temple Mount, and it was the first person really to come up with a map of what the foundations around there looked like. And this was picked up by another Christian writer in Britain. His name was Thomas Lewin. He was a lawyer. He was like me. He was very into details, and he wrote a paper. And he also described himself as a 25-year student of Josephus. He was fluent in Greek. He quotes Josephus in the original Greek. He picked apart Josephus in such detail that he could reconstruct what the temple and area and the temple sanctuary looked like relative to today's Temple Mount. So I've got this whole idea of putting all of his ideas and putting that forth in a book. So
Well, certainly keep us posted, because I'd love to hear more about that and how the Lord leads you toward that. Dr. Sanford, before you go today, would you just encourage my listeners, especially those who are concerned about what they see in the world around us today, and they wonder where God is in it all? Would you just leave us with a word of encouragement today?
well, in spite of things in the world that can really go south and look horrible, like what happened in the time of Jerusalem, God is sovereign and He has a long term plan, and things. And then the Christians went through years and years of persecution, but things eventually turn around, and the enemy is not going to win; he is defeated, and so the long term victory is assured. So,
Amen. Amen. So, like in every generation, we need to hang tight, keep our eyes set on
right,
Jesus, keep the Bible as our blueprint, our GPS through life, and know that it's no small thing to trust Him in
right. Our lives here are temporary. This is just the training ground, and being with Him for eternity is our home.
That's
So,
right. I've heard someone say that all of this is just the dress rehearsal
yes.
before the real thing. Yes, yes. Well, Dr. Sanford, thank you for joining me today. I wish you well. Tell my listeners where they can get a copy of the Cry for Jerusalem series.
Yeah, the Cry for Jerusalem series is available on Amazon. In fact, if you just type Cry for Jerusalem into Google. It will take you to Amazon, where you can get the books in paperback. They're also available on Kindle. And I had hired a British voice actor who narrated the whole series on the audiobook. So if you like listening, you can get them in audio series as well.
Oh, I love that. I love to listen to books. So that's likely the way I will be doing it.
Right.
So thank you for joining me, Dr. Sanford. Wish you the best. Please stay in touch. I want to know what you're up to next.
Thank you, Carol.
Well, this was a powerful conversation with a great man of God. Dr. Sanford is not only a great and amazing intellect, he also has a heart for the Holy Scriptures. I love how my conversation with Dr. Sanford reminds us all that our faith is not a fairy tale, okay? But it's grounded in actual history, in people that historically lived, and it's also built upon sacrifice. These men and women gave everything they had, everything they were, often their very lives, for the cause of Jesus Christ. The early church lived boldly in the face of persecution, uncertainty, and upheaval, and their courage is still speaking to us today. Maybe you found yourself wondering where God is in the middle of all that's happening in our world. Let me encourage you. God has never lost control of human history, and he's never stopped away from your story either. Before we go, I want to encourage you with one scripture. Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever. Hebrews chapter 13, verse 8. The God of the early church is the God of you. The God who calmed the stormy waters under the feet of Peter is the God of you. The God who multiplied loaves and fishes is the God of you. The God who brought Jairus' daughter back to life is the God of you. And the same God who was faithful to the early church, who fulfilled prophetic words, and who carried his people through suffering, is the same God walking with you today. Never doubt it. History may change, circumstances may erupt, but we serve a God who never changes. My friend, your life is significant. God is always at work, even in the tough days of life, even in the waiting, even in the struggle. Let's hold on to that truth this week. If you've enjoyed today's episode, be sure you leave a rating and a review, and also take the time to share it with someone who's also interested in church history. I know this episode will be a blessing, maybe to your pastor. So be sure and share it today. As always, you can find more encouragement at carolmcleodministries.com. And don't forget to pick up a copy of Dr. Ward Sanford's new novel series, Cry for Jerusalem. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next week for another episode of the Significant Women Podcast with Carol McLeod.